I knew something was off the moment I saw 3 orange cones and a laminated sign that read "Unauthorized Water Source" staked next to my well. It was 7 in the morning. I was sipping coffee on my porch, watching the sun rise over the trees, when I saw the red SUV roll up. Out stepped Gloria Greenfield, president of the Willow Creek HOA and the most obnoxious busybody I'd ever met. She strutted across my lawn in those ridiculous wedge sandals with a clipboard in hand, looking like she was about to shut down a construction site. "Mr. Elijah Knox," she called, snapping her sunglasses down onto her nose. "You are in violation of Article 17, Section 4, unauthorized groundwater extraction." I set the coffee down slowly. "It's a private well, Gloria. Permitted and drilled back in '03. It's grandfathered in." "Not anymore," she replied, flipping through her clipboard. "The HOA board voted last month to ban all private water sources. For sustainability." I laughed. "You don't have the authority to override state permits." She didn't blink. "We do now. We passed a bylaw. You can't override state law with a neighborhood vote, Gloria." She just tapped the laminated sign like it was divine scripture. "If you don't seal it by Friday, we'll hire someone to do it and charge your account." I stared at her for a second, stunned. "That's illegal." "It's community enforcement," she said, turning back toward her SUV. "Don't make this difficult, Elijah." I watched her drive off, my heart pounding. This was beyond her usual nonsense over mailbox colors or lawn height. This was my water, my property, and now she thought she could just shut it down? I wasn't about to let some overcaffeinated HOA tyrant threaten my rights. By noon, I'd pulled out the original well permit, the hydrogeology report, every approval stamped by the state back when I had it drilled. I even had the inspection report from last year when I had the pump replaced. I called the HOA office. Gloria's assistant, some guy named Trent, answered. He gave me the same line she did. "The board voted. It's binding." "Then you're all about to have a very bad week." I drove straight down to the State Department of Environmental Protection the next morning. Took a number, sat down, and waited. When my turn came, I laid out the documents on the clerk's desk and explained what was happening. The moment I said HOA threatened to seal my permitted well, the guy raised his eyebrows and called in his supervisor. Turns out, not only was my well fully legal, but interfering with it was a criminal offense under state law. Tampering with a state-permitted water source? That's a Class D felony. The supervisor handed me a form. "File this complaint. We'll take it from here. And if they even touch that well, call the sheriff." I left the building with a copy of the complaint in hand and a wicked sense that things were about to get very interesting. The following Wednesday, I returned home from work to find a neon green notice duct-taped to my front door. Apparently, the HOA had fined me $200 for non-compliance with community water regulations. Below that was a line about pending enforcement action. No signature, no contact info. Just one of those generic HOA letterheads with the eagle logo and the words Willow Creek Community Integrity Division. I stood there staring at it, my jaw tightening. The ink on my official complaint to the state hadn't even had time to fade, and they were already doubling down. The next morning, I didn't just call the sheriff. I walked straight into the county courthouse and filed a formal police report. The clerk behind the desk raised her eyebrows when I explained the situation, especially when I mentioned the HOA's plan to hire contractors to physically alter a legally registered water source without the owner's consent. Her name was Denise, and she said it plainly: "You're describing criminal mischief, maybe even conspiracy to commit property damage. If they follow through, it's jail time." She handed me a copy of the report and directed me to the district attorney's office. I didn't hesitate. I was done playing defense. The assistant district attorney was a tall, no-nonsense woman named Claire Redding. She didn't waste time with small talk. "You got documentation?" she asked, pulling a legal pad from her drawer. I spread everything out in front of her: permits, the HOA's notice, the fine, even a photo of the cones they'd left beside the wellhead. Her eyes narrowed. "They're threatening to seal a permitted well? By Friday," I said. "They're telling people it's for sustainability, but this is about control." Claire made a few notes, then looked up. You're not the only one who's come in about this HOA. We've had 3 complaints in the last 2 months. False fines. Unauthorized fees. One woman said they threatened to tow her car for having a bumper sticker they didn't like. I leaned forward. You think they're building a case? I think, she said, tapping her pen against the pad, they're about to have a very unpleasant few weeks. It didn't take long for things to escalate. That Friday morning, I set up 2 trail cameras hidden in the trees facing the well. I didn't trust them not to try something reckless. At 3:45 p.m., a white pickup truck marked with Greenfield Property Services pulled into the cul-de-sac. 2 men in reflective vests climbed out and walked straight toward the well, carrying a roll of orange tape and a metal cap. I stepped out from the side of the house, phone already recording. Can I help you? I asked. The taller one looked startled. We're here on behalf of the HOA. They told us this well was being decommissioned. Did they give you a work order? He hesitated. They said it was urgent. Something about a contamination risk. I held up my phone. That well is fully permitted and inspected. Tampering with it is illegal. You touch it, I call the sheriff. They exchanged glances. After a moment, they backed off and returned to the truck. As they drove off, I caught the company name and plate. An hour later, I emailed the footage to Claire. Within 24 hours, she got a court order blocking any physical action on the property. Then things really started to unravel. On Monday, a state investigator named Ron Alvarez knocked on my door. He'd been assigned to the case after my complaint was fast-tracked. He wore a Navy windbreaker with the seal of the Department of Environmental Protection and carried a briefcase that looked like it hadn't left his side in years. I need to speak to your HOA president, he said plainly, and I'd prefer you be present when I do. We walked 2 blocks to the HOA's rented office space, a converted model home with a fake fireplace and plastic plants in every corner. Gloria was inside, sitting at a glass desk with a stack of manila folders and a smug expression that faded the second she saw Ron's badge. Can I help you? She asked, her voice clipped. Ron didn't bother with pleasantries. You authorized an attempt to cap a state-permitted well? Excuse me, who are you? Environmental Enforcement Division. We received a complaint backed by documentation and surveillance footage. We're investigating criminal interference with a regulated utility. Gloria's face paled. I was acting on behalf of the community. The board. Ron cut her off. You're not licensed to make that kind of decision. You're not a certified hydrologist, and your HOA has no authority over state water infrastructure. I didn't know it was illegal, she said quickly. You signed and distributed official notices. That's willful action, not ignorance. I could see her carefully constructed confidence cracking. Ron reached into his briefcase and pulled out a cease and desist letter from the state. You're being ordered to stand down on all enforcement actions related to water access. Any further attempts will be met with legal penalties, including charges of conspiracy and environmental sabotage. Gloria didn't say anything, just stared at the letter like it might burst into flames. Ron turned to me. Would you be willing to testify if it comes to trial? Gladly, I said. That night, the HOA board held an emergency meeting in the community clubhouse. Word had already spread. Dozens of residents showed up, many of them holding copies of similar notices they'd received over the past year. Gloria tried to call the meeting to order, but the crowd wasn't having it. A man in the back, Marcus Delgado, a retired plumber, stood up and shouted, "You tried to shut off someone's legal water supply. We trusted you." Another woman held up a spreadsheet. "You fined my sister 3 times for unauthorized yard decor. She lives in a condo with no yard." The board tried to leave quietly, but Ron was already there, handing out subpoenas and collecting statements. Within a week, Gloria resigned. So did 2 other board members. When the dust settled, the county filed charges against the HOA's board for criminal trespass, attempted property damage, and fraudulent fines. Gloria was personally fined $5,000 and banned from holding any community office for 10 years. The state dissolved Willow Creek's HOA charter, citing systemic abuse of authority. A provisional community council was formed, made up of residents who'd volunteered to serve with transparency and oversight. I didn't run for it. I didn't have to. The point had been made. You don't mess with someone's property. And you definitely don't mess with their water. Especially not in a state that takes its permits seriously. The morning after Gloria's resignation, I thought I'd finally be able to breathe. But peace has a way of arriving late in Willow Creek. I was in the middle of replacing a cracked irrigation line when my neighbor, June Holloway, came jogging up the street. Her usual stride was calm and steady, but this time her sneakers slapped the pavement like she was trying to stomp out a fire. "Elijah," she called, waving a manila envelope overhead. "You need to see this." I wiped my hands on my jeans and met her by the mailbox. She handed me the envelope. Inside were copies of financial statements dated over the last 12 months' monthly HOA expense reports, contractor payments, and something that made my stomach twist, a series of water infrastructure improvement charges totaling nearly $75,000. Each one had been signed off by Gloria and a board member named Lyle Corman, whose name I hadn't heard mentioned during the fallout. June tapped the line item with a painted fingernail. They claimed it was for backflow prevention and runoff control. But I work in municipal accounting. These figures don't line up with any real work. I flipped through the pages. The vendors listed on the invoices names like AquaSafe Solutions and HydroTrust Services didn't ring any bells. Some didn't even have contact info. No licenses, no EINs, nothing. Where did you get this? June glanced up the street before lowering her voice. From a former board secretary. She quit last month after Gloria told her to keep the books clean. I think they were funneling money through fake contractors. We didn't waste time. That afternoon, we brought the documents to Claire Redding's office. She wasn't surprised to see us. "We've been waiting for something like this," she said, flipping through the packet. The moment we got the court order, the state auditor started a quiet probe. "This confirms our suspicions." Claire picked up the phone and dialed a number without hesitation. "Get me Forensics Finance." We found the paper trail. The next 48 hours were a blur. State auditors descended on Willow Creek like a swarm of hornets. They had laptops, scanners, and badge wallets with embossed seals. One of them, a wiry man with silver-rimmed glasses named Leo, asked to set up in my garage so they could work away from prying eyes. I cleared out my workbench and brought them bottled water, then watched them sift through files like bloodhounds on a scent. By Thursday, they had enough to file a formal motion with the state attorney general's office. The charges? Embezzlement, wire fraud, and falsification of municipal records. The scope of it was staggering. Over the course of 2 years, Gloria and Lyle had approved over $120,000 in fraudulent expenses. Most of it had been routed through shell companies that didn't exist beyond a few Photoshop invoices and a couple of burner email accounts. Claire called me that evening. "They're going for indictments," she said. "This isn't just fines and probation. This is prison time." By Friday, the sheriff's department had picked up Gloria at a bed and breakfast 2 towns over. She'd been trying to offload a box of HOA documents to a man who, unfortunately for her, turned out to be an undercover state investigator posing as an independent records consultant. Lyle was arrested at a country club bar while trying to withdraw $10,000 in cashier's checks under a fake name. The news broke fast. Local papers ran headlines like HOA Watergate and Well Scheme Unravels in Willow Creek. A news van parked outside the subdivision for 2 days straight, and neighbors who once stayed quiet at meetings were now stopping me in the street to say, "We should have listened sooner." But the mess wasn't just financial. As the investigators dug deeper, they found something worse. A week after the arrests, Leo called me into the garage-turned-temporary auditorium. He was holding a USB stick and a grim expression. "We pulled metadata from some of the HOA's internal files," he said. One of the emails Gloria sent to Lyle included a PDF map looks like a modified utility plan. He opened his laptop and showed me the document. It was a map of Willow Creek, but the utility lines had been altered. According to the key, my well and 4 others had been marked as inactive and non-potable. The date on the file? 2 weeks before Gloria posted the laminated sign on my property. "They tried to falsify the status of your water source," Leo said. If this had reached the county health department, it could have triggered a forced shutdown. I stared at the screen, a cold anger rising behind my ribs. "That's a felony, isn't it?" Leo nodded. "Tampering with public utility records. It carries a serious sentence." The state added 2 more charges to the list: falsification of environmental documents and attempted interference with a registered utility. Gloria and Lyle were now facing up to 20 years each. But what struck me most wasn't the scale of their crimes, it was how close they came to pulling it off. If I hadn't caught them in the act, if I hadn't filed when I did, they might have rewritten the records and buried the well under a mountain of fake reports. The state didn't just stop at criminal charges. They launched a civil suit to recover the stolen funds. As part of the proceedings, they froze all HOA accounts and seized the property deed for the community clubhouse, which had been used as collateral for one of the fake infrastructure loans. Residents were furious. The clubhouse had hosted weddings, birthdays, and community cookouts. And now it was being sold at auction to help pay restitution. At the next provisional council meeting, people stood up and demanded a full audit of every HOA action from the last 5 years. A retired judge named Milton Briggs was appointed as oversight chair. He brought in a forensic accounting firm and swore in each new council member under oath. The community transformed. Gone were the days of secret votes and closed-door fines. Every decision was now made in public. Meeting minutes were posted online. Budgets were itemized and published monthly down to the last cent. I stayed out of office, but I didn't stay quiet. I led a petition to limit the power of any future HOA board, including a clause that prevented them from accessing resident utilities without a court order. We got over 200 signatures in 3 days. And then came the letters. People from other neighborhoods, some even from neighboring counties, started writing to ask how we did it, how we exposed the fraud, how we protected ourselves. I compiled everything into a detailed guide and published it online, titled "Holding Power Accountable in Your HOA." It went viral in certain circles. Local news picked it up. A homeowners' rights group invited me to speak at their next conference. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because no one should have to fight this hard just to access their own water. And yet, I'll admit, it felt good watching the system that tried to bury me get dug up. Instead, one document, one witness, one truth at a time. Justice didn't come politely. It came with subpoenas, court orders, and a community that finally realized silence was its own kind of surrender. We chose to speak. And in doing so, we drained the corruption straight out of Willow Creek right down to the last drop. 2 weeks after Gloria's arrest, a quiet tension hung over Willow Creek like humidity before a thunderstorm. The streets were strangely quiet even for mid-June. Lawns went unmowed. Porch lights stayed off. People were waiting. Not out of fear, but anticipation. That Tuesday, Claire called again, but this time her tone was different. We got a call from the state attorney's office. "You need to come in." I met her at the county courthouse, where she walked me through a narrow hallway lined with closed doors and into a room with no windows. There were 2 people already seated at the table. One was a federal prosecutor from the DOJ's Public Integrity Section. The other introduced himself as a water rights investigator from the EPA's Criminal Division. I didn't sit. I waited. The DOJ rep, a man named Callahan, opened a folder and slid a photo across the table. It showed a stack of printed documents, all stamped and marked HOA meeting minutes, financial reports, and something that immediately caught my eye, a federal grant application. Gloria's signature was on it. She submitted this 6 months ago, Callahan said. Claimed the HOA was funding a groundwater reclamation project for underserved households. Claire didn't blink. "There's no such project. Willow Creek's entirely residential. No qualifying households. Callahan nodded. Exactly. And it gets worse. He turned to the EPA official who laid out a sheet showing payment deposits from a federal agency into an HOA account, specifically the same account used to pay the fake contractors. The total payout? Just over $125,000. She used falsified environmental reports to secure a federal sustainability grant, he said, then redirected the funds into private accounts under the guise of water safety upgrades. My jaw clenched. She weaponized a fake water crisis to steal federal money? Precisely, Callahan said. And that makes it federal fraud, wire fraud, and misuse of environmental grant funding. This is no longer a county matter. I was asked to provide a sworn affidavit detailing everything I'd experienced from the cones by the well to the forged utility map. I signed, initialed, and dated every page without hesitation. Later that afternoon, the feds executed a search warrant on the home of Lyle Corman. He hadn't spoken publicly since Gloria's arrest, and now we knew why. Inside, agents found 2 external hard drives, 12 burner phones, and an encrypted USB key hidden behind a false panel in his office. The drives contained domestic wire transfers under multiple LLC names, none of which had tax filings. One of them, Hydro Trust Environments, matched the name on the fake invoice June had given me. The USB key was even worse. It held a typed transcript of an audio file, a conversation between Gloria and a man referred to only as Brett. In the transcript, Gloria referenced the well directly. If we can mark it as non-functional, she said, then we can apply for Phase 2 funding. We just need Knox to shut it down voluntarily. If not, we'll file a contamination risk. The voice labeled Brett replied, if he resists, I'll handle it. Quietly. That was enough for the DOJ to act. They arrested Brett Harmon the next morning. He wasn't a board member. He was the owner of a private environmental consulting firm that had filed the original risk analysis against my well. The firm wasn't certified. In fact, it didn't exist outside of a polished website with a fake address and a disconnected phone number. At a press conference that afternoon, U.S. Attorney Callahan laid it out clearly. This was a coordinated attempt to defraud a federal agency, tamper with private property under false pretenses, and manipulate environmental policy for personal profit. We will not tolerate manufactured crises for financial gain. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps. I kept my distance, but word spread quickly. Willow Creek was now a national example of HOA corruption gone nuclear. Then came the restitution hearing. The state had already frozen the HOA's assets, but now the federal government was involved. The judge granted a motion to dissolve the HOA entirely, citing continuous abuse of authority, systemic fraud, and unlawful interference with utility infrastructure. Every resident received a certified letter stating that the HOA no longer held legal standing. The neighborhood would revert to county oversight until a new governance model could be democratically elected under supervision. All fines, liens, and penalties issued in the last 3 years were voided. At the hearing, Gloria appeared in a navy jumpsuit. Her hair, once perfectly coiffed, hung limp and graying. She didn't speak. Her attorney entered a plea deal, guilty on 5 counts, including federal wire fraud and falsification of environmental documents. She would serve 8 years in federal prison with no possibility of early parole. Lyle received 5 years for his role in financial laundering, and Brett got 7 for submitting fraudulent risk reports and conspiring to interfere with public utilities. The well itself had remained untouched, but now it was a symbol. The county erected a small fence around it, not to restrict it but to mark it for preservation. A simple plaque was installed at its base. This well stood during an attempt to silence truth with power. It remained. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood changed in ways no one expected. People started showing up to community meetings, real ones held at the local library, overseen by a temporary board of residents selected by random lottery. June was one of them. So was Marcus Delgado, the retired plumber who'd spoken out during the emergency meeting. They created a working charter with clear limits on authority, open financial disclosures, and a public complaints system that required documented evidence before any action could be taken. I was asked to help draft the Water Access Clause. I made sure it guaranteed that no private utility could be regulated or restricted without a court-verified environmental review. It passed unanimously. One evening, just before sunset, I walked past Gloria's old house. The blinds were drawn. A for sale sign tilted slightly in the lawn. The air was still, but the silence felt earned, not imposed. As I turned the corner toward my place, I saw a kid maybe 10 riding a bike down the middle of the road with a garden hose coiled around his shoulders like a lasso. He waved and shouted something about helping his dad wash the truck. It hit me then. They tried to shut off the water to control people, to bend the truth into something profitable. But water doesn't take orders. It moves where it needs to. So do people when they're tired of being pushed around. We didn't just defend a well. We exposed a system that thought it could rewrite rules behind closed doors and never be questioned. They underestimated how fast the truth spreads once people stop being afraid. And for the first time in years, Willow Creek wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a community. One that knew exactly where the line was and what to do when someone tried to cross it.